Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon, where we talk about politics, the culture war, and anything else that comes up. And this is a special extra episode. In addition to our normal guest episodes, I thought we'd do a debrief or reflection on the Richard Tice episode. Now, in future, these would come out closer to the release of the actual episode, but it's just an experiment at this stage, so we're doing it now a bit late because the Richard Tice one was a couple of weeks ago. But the idea is, you get these great guests on the podcast, and then you're like immediately on to the next one, but there's so much more to discuss. So I thought we'd bring in young Rory, our YouTube clips genius, and also host of the Radical English Gentleman podcast, which he keeps telling me he's going to rename. And it should be really interesting because he's a bit younger than me, and apparently only agrees with 30% of my views. It's a bit of an issue there. He's a libertarian of some kind, and apparently pro-immigration, so he's like our resident lib. I think libtard would be a bit strong, but he's a bit of a lib. So thanks for doing this, Rory. And do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Well, thanks for being here. Really do appreciate the opportunity. Lovely introduction there. My name's Rory, 19 years old. I run the Radical English Gentleman podcast, where I get people from all different walks of life, all different ages, all different political views, and we just shoot the shit. We often drink, and we talk about current events, culture, and so much more.
You can good intro, but you can tell he's young because he immediately swore in the intro.
Really?
He didn't say his surname, which is Jacobs, if anyone needs to know that. And yeah, you've got your own podcast, which is cool. And so you're very different to me. You're a libertarian. We can get into that later. But you said you agreed with me on, 30%? Was that right?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on some things. It's just, you got your standard immigration. Disagree with a lot of the rhetoric. And
my rhetoric? What's wrong with my... Makes it sound like I'm a Nazi or something. I disagree with... I want to disavow Nick's rhetoric.
Yeah. Just like as in... I've heard you speak about Andrew Tate a lot, and I think you got quite a lot of hypocrisy with what you say about that. I think I'm very against kind of trying to fit in a box. That's my whole brand. So I disagree, and I feel like you do mould the kind of somewhat classic right-wing viewpoints, if you know what I mean.
That's so funny. The young generation, they're straight in with you let them on your podcast and they're like insulting you within seconds. You're hypocritical about Tate. Did you listen to that week? Did you listen to the Weekly Skeptic where I had a half an hour debate with Toby about Tate?
Oh, really? No, I haven't actually.
All your questions will be answered in that episode. It's called Freed Top G, that episode. Freed with a D, Top G. And that's, everything's answered in that. So, Rory, we're going to talk about the Richard Tice episode. And it was a great episode. It's doing really well, and your clips are doing very well. So Rory does the clips on YouTube, especially the shorts are amazing. He's like a genius at the shorts, and they're doing really well. The immigration one hit like 20K. People are obviously concerned about that. But some people say in the comments like, "Oh, Tice is not charismatic enough." I think he is charismatic, and he was a good guy as well. And I got this thing where I judge posh people, where I just think we're not gonna connect because I've got this weird class prejudice. Whereas actually he's just a super nice guy. It was really easy to book as well because you can tell a lot about people by how hard or easy they are to book. Like I tried to book one guy recently. He said he'd do it, but you couldn't pin him down on the time. Then he asked me to get on GB News, and it just fell through. And it's not like he was a massive guy. He had like fewer followers than me. And you're like, why is this so hard to book this guy? And why is he already asking me for an opportunity? So you learn a lot. Comics are a nightmare, and just like, I'll have to think about it. And they're worried about the culture war. Maybe that's fair enough because I'll probably get cancelled. Whereas Tice was just bang, yeah, let's do it. And it was just done. And that kind of makes sense because he talks about competence a lot. And he did seem a very competent guy. What was your impression of him overall?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And that's like profound he says that because, he's a busy man. He runs a massive business. He's got a show on Talk TV. He goes on GB News. Like, he's a busy man. So that definitely shows a lot, I think. My view on the episode, I thought it was a cracking episode. It outlined very well, what Richard Tice is about, the competency of him, what a reform about, and he laid out everything so direct, and that's one thing I really love about Richard Tice. Even though I disagree with him on so many issues, he's so straightforward. He says, we got an energy crisis, this is how we're going to solve it. We got an NHS crisis, this is how we're going to solve it. We got, an immigration crisis, this is how we're going to solve it. It's so direct, train and retain, make work pay, get the job done, stop the boats. No matter what it is, it's clear, it's concise, and you know exactly what they think. But then when you look at Labour, politicians, the Tories, it's all, we might do this, we might do that. We're going to make the economy great. What the hell does that mean? But Richard Tice, he was just so direct. And the fact that a party leader who is, head of a party that is, you could say third biggest in the UK, is going on independent podcasts, shooting the shit, saying what he thinks, saying exactly what he would do. I mean, when do you have that in modern day politics? And for that, I've got, so much respect. And it was a brilliantly interviewed podcast with great questions as well.
Thanks, mate. You got to get the brown nosing bit in. Yeah, I appreciate it. Are they really the third biggest party? Is that?
Kinda, because you got Lib Dem, SNP, but like in a lot of areas, it's kinda. Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Yeah. So would you vote as a young person? Would you consider voting for them?
No.
Really? Great interview, great guy. He's nailing all the issues. Would you vote for? No. What are you talking about, mate?
Well,
but can I just say quickly, in case we put this out on video and anyone's viewing it, Rory looks like a skinhead. And for the audio people, he's literally got a skinhead, and he's gone with the polo shirt as well. In case he didn't look enough like a Proud Boy, he's wearing the classic polo shirt of every young skinhead thug. But it's a good look. It's a good aesthetic. But you have to explain to people, presumably, that you're not an actual Nazi.
Yeah, I get it a lot. Like I famously went out on Halloween, right, and I wasn't wearing a costume. Everyone was wearing a costume in the club, and had 3 people come up to me and said, "Are you dressed up as a Nazi?" And I was like, "Oh dear me."
So your normal look looks like fancy dress, and really misguided fancy dress. They kind of got Prince Harry in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I've really I've painted myself in a weird way because I'm nationalistic, but I'm not, that right wing. I'm a skinhead, but I'm not obviously a Nazi. So it's easy to kind of put me in a box. But again, the whole point of me is not trying to be put in a box. So it's like, that's why I stand up for a lot of kind of right-wing traits and stuff, but I'm also quite left-wing in a lot of respects. That's why I disagree with you and Richard on a lot. So,
well, I try not to be in a box either. That's why I like Andrew Tate, even though I'm a Christian and you say I can't. You call it hypocrisy. I call it not being in a box, man. All right, I can't remember what my question was to you now. Oh, yes, would you vote for reform? And you said no way. Interesting. A lot of people would comment. Go on.
Yes, so the reason I wouldn't is because someone like Richard Tice, he's got a good outline. But again, for me, it boils down to the argument of immigration. When I look at immigration, of how it will impact jobs, how it will boost the economy, how it will help so many aspects. I look at that, and I'm a capitalist, I'm a Christian, and I look at that and go, bring it on. That's good, because the market will decide if someone does well. And also, I feel like there's hypocrisy in the argument on the right wing when it comes to immigration. On one hand, immigrants are stealing the jobs of hard-working Brits, and then on the other hand, they're claiming benefits and they're lazy. So I think when it comes to the immigration issue, it just loses me every time when right wingers espouse anti-immigration sentiment, because I'm a libertarian, I'm pro-freedom, so I have no problem with people coming over and doing it. And that's not to say there isn't cultural issues. I admit there's actually many cultural issues. If someone comes from Saudi Arabia, they want to kill gay people and abuse women and them not have rights. We shouldn't accept that culture. And I'm not for like a social security net, and when people come over here they just have access to everything someone does who paid tax for 10 years. I disagree with that, but what I'm saying is, as a libertarian and someone who's pro-freedom, that goes to the extremes of immigration. And for people like Richard Tice, when he talks about stopping the boats and all of this, I just look at that and it puts me off. And that's the one issue where it's like, if he flipped his viewpoint on that, I'd vote for him in seconds.
So I've heard a lot of libertarians say that you can be pro-welfare state or immigration, but not both, because you can't have anyone from anywhere in the world just coming over and getting on a benefit system. It's unsustainable. But you're saying you're pro the immigration part, but not the welfare state part. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So like, if someone comes from, I don't know, Nigeria or whatever, and they come over here and they want to work and pay taxes, contribute to the economy, go ahead. I got no problem with that. But I do have a problem if someone comes over and just like has the same access to a granny who paid taxes for 80 years, if you know what I mean. Like, yeah.
I'm kind of amazed you're pro-immigration at this point, because of obviously the social, cultural problems that we're all well aware of. And also, it doesn't actually work. I was listening to this podcast with Paul Morland on The Telegraph, and he's a demographics expert. Have you heard of pronatalism? So he was saying that so we got the birth rate problem, haven't we, which is massive. And everywhere, loads of places have it. Japan are basically dying out. South Korea are dying out. And he said, well, so look, we've got a couple of solutions. We've got immigration as one solution, but it's only short term. So the immigrants themselves get old, they need services, and also you're taking them from countries that also have low birth rates and won't be able to sustain that. So he said that's a classic short-termist politician's approach, And he said Japan's approach, which is anti-immigration, so they have better social cohesion, but they're dying because of simple lack of numbers, and they ultimately won't be able to sustain their own societies if they keep that up, and their own economies. Or economy in that case. So he's saying the only way is actually a pro-natal approach, which means just having loads of kids. He's like, everyone's going to have 2 or 3 kids. We need to somehow incentivize that, and that's the only way out of it. So what do you think to that flaw of immigration? That actually it's a kind of short-term patching up of the economy.
Well, I think, yeah, there's some fair arguments there, but as a capitalist, I have no problem with that. And, like, I've actually supported what they have in Hungary with family first policies where, you know, if you have 3 or more kids, you pay 0 income tax forever. If you have 3 or more kids, you get a free $9,000 equivalent car for your family. You know, you have, like, massive bonuses with tax. They promote marriage, they promote kids, and I love all that. I think that's brilliant, and that's actually one thing in the UK where I actually would completely support family first policies. The people who live here, if they want to have a kid, it won't, you know, strip them to death. And also that's the other abortion argument, where in Hungary since 2010, when they brought in family first policies, their abortion rates have just plummeted because, like, it, you know, if you give people economic opportunities to actually have kids and not just be terrified to have a kid, then people will have kids, and they will actually, like, benefit the economy with that. And I think as a Christian country, we should actually promote, you know, marriage and having kids, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And that's many right-wing traits that I agree with. But what I see a lot of hypocrisy on the right is a lot of people promote, you know, traditional values or family values, but then any form of welfare state or support for families, they're running to the hills, and often it's actually only Labour who are pushing for, like, you know, universal child credit and, like, incentive for people to have families. So that's, yeah, massive thing, I think.
Interesting. A few things there is that as a skinhead supporting Orban, you've got to be a bit careful. The policies of Orban. But I see what you mean. Incentivizing birth rate. We absolutely need to do that. And you think about having kids. Someone's put it to me the other day that, well, one reason people don't have kids is because of immigration, because that's causing pressure on services and inflation and poverty and all these things. Someone put it to me that actually one reason people can't have kids is because of immigration. I don't know if you agree with that, but that was another angle. But the other thing I was going to say there is...
What would that argument be there, though?
Well, I think it was Leo that said it, so it probably wasn't totally coherent, but it was it was something to do with immigration putting pressure on services and housing, meaning people can't have kids because they, for example, can't get a house, can't afford services, things like that. I think that's what he was going with. And I suppose wages are pushed down. So that was probably the argument there.
But do you think the direction of what people attack is the wrong thing? Because why would you attack someone coming over here with little to nothing and potentially making themselves of something, instead not, you know, the private sector or whatever, or like big multinational corporations not paying their workers, or like, you know, BlackRock, Vanguard? Why didn't you attack those people instead of people who are more similar to you? And I think this is one thing. There are right-wingers out there who put massive amounts of money into pushing, you know, anti-immigrant sentiment instead of not focusing on the rich elites. And that's one kind of aspect of left-wingers I think they got spot on, where they say, you know, the culture war is a distraction from economic disparity. And that's one, like, angle that I think if Labour actually lent into class war, not race war, every, you know, 2 seconds or whatever, they would actually have solidarity with a lot of working class people. Because I think if you speak to the average person up north, they don't realise economically they're very left wing, but it's often, you know, race and immigration that divides. And when those two unite, the people who are actually elites and people who are actually affecting their lives will be screwed over from that.
Very interesting. I was thinking there when you were talking, because I'm going to get back to Richard Tice's view on immigration in a second, but when you were talking about the culture war being a distraction, I totally disagree with that, because I think it's a huge stealth cultural revolution we've undergone. And when the left says you're stoking culture wars or divisive culture wars, I just see that as pure gaslighting. However, I do accept a possibility that someone somewhere higher up in the 1% has caused the whole thing as a kind of distraction. Because my theory is the 1% always want to distract us from everything, because their primary concern is how to hold on to wealth. But so I do think that's possible. But then maybe whoever stoked it has been stoked. There is sex education where 9-year-olds are being taught absurd things. 16-year-olds are being told they can mutilate themselves permanently in the name of gender ideology. These things are not an illusion. You know, women's spaces are under threat. Women's sports are about to be destroyed or have been destroyed. Now they're pushing back. So those things aren't an illusion, are they?
No, I agree with you. And there are real And I'm completely anti-woke, and I was in school a few years ago getting taught the nonsense. I was 18 in college getting taught, sex doesn't exist, and there's so much nonsense, and to act like, these ridiculous woke ideologies don't exist, you're an absolute moron, and these are massive issues, But it's also to say that when a left-winger says to a right-winger, how am I going to pay the bills instead of trans kids? There is a fair criticism there and it's almost a blind spot, I think, for a lot of right-wingers. And there's people who focus zero on economics, but literally only trans kids. And there's a certain point where you've got to be like, hang on, who are we actually going to divert our attention to? And someone like Matt Walsh is someone who I really don't like, because every episode he bangs on about trans kids or trans people, and this is a man under COVID or whatever who talks about freedom. Now, that isn't to say we should go around mutilating 6-year-olds, but it's also to say that if you're going to preach freedom, you can't say to a consenting adult that they can't undertake surgery. And Matt Walsh has said he thinks a physician who has a certain procedure for an adult should be arrested and locked up. So like, wokeness and woke ideology is a real thing, and it's terrible, and so is the culture war. But you also got to be careful not to just become the same thing you're against. There is identity politics and identitarianism.
To be fair to Matt Walsh, I'm not sure he even pretends to not be authoritarian. His Twitter bio says theocratic fascist, and he's partly joking. But he doesn't mind being authoritarian at this point, I don't think. So I don't know if there is such a contradiction. Because I think he's basically a moralist, sort of, conservative, not a libertarian. So, but you don't have to like him. But you do make a good point about economics and wokeness, where the economic outlook of, well, my generation and younger, anyone millennial and Zoomer, and what's yours? Are you Zoomer or Alpha?
I'm absolutely clueless.
That's mad. You could even be Alpha, which is scary, because they've started again and they've gone back to A. Because Zoomer, I don't know when Zoomer ends. I'm going to check right now, but you could be Alpha, which is really scary. But you do make a good point, because economics, of course, is related to wokeness in the way that Steve Bannon sort of talks about. These people come. He says of the younger generation, you're feudal serfs. He goes, okay, you better dress, you're in better shape, okay, but you don't own anything. You're not going to own anything. And so post 2008 crash, people said, hang on, we're not going to have anything here. And they had the Occupy Wall Street movement and so on. And then that led perhaps to wokeness as a kind of new kind of rebellion, a way of sort of doing something in the world when you feel completely, you kind of detached from things because you can't afford anything. So that's another theory. But let me just check Gen Alpha. This is people born between 2010 and 2025. So maybe you're what are you, Gen Z? I don't want to do maths live on air, but you'd have to be, if you're 19, you must be Gen Z.
Yeah, so 2000.
Or Z. I keep saying Z and people shout at me just because I've heard it. So it's mid to late 90s and as early as 2010s as ending birth years. So, hang on, what are you? I'm doing the 23 minus...
I'm 2000. I'm born 2003 and I'm 19.
Yeah, so you're smack in the middle of Gen Z. All right, just so the listener knows. I'm fascinated by that kind of thing. I'm a geriatric millennial. We don't want to go into it, but it's too embarrassing. But I'm the older side of millennial. But getting back to old Tice, I wanted to ask you how woke are your friends, by the way. Let me just ask you that first. You said you had to deal with all this woke crap in school.
Yeah.
But you didn't go for it. Are your friends like woke, or do they just think it's all bollocks?
Well, nah, so I'd say, I'm a bit isolated recently. I don't actually have that many friends, but when I did, I had, I'd say, majority, well, because a lot of my friends are like kind of sparky engineers. They weren't, but then I've also, a lot of my friends now are very, like I've got two mates who are like far left. They think the UK's, super racist. And like we have arguments now and again. And like recently, a few things happened, and I've had a lot of relationships. Even just speaking to people, in an intimate way, I've had relationships lost because of my political views. And it's funny because like I speak to you, and to you, I'm like a kind of centre left snowflake almost. And then
I wouldn't say if you're pro Viktor Orban's child policy. No, I just think you're basically on the right, but you're kind of but with a weird libertarian streak. That's all that you'll grow out of.
Well, I don't know about that. And so like people on the right often think that, but then in my own circles, I'm kind of the loony right winger, and like, yeah, it's quite sad actually because it's like I'm not famous at all, and I'm having people I know or potential things that could have happened in my life kind of squander because of my political views. And I love talking to everyone, and that's what my show's about. It's like I literally say to people who call me a Nazi, I say, do you want to come on the show? Like I've had people who've like, you know, sent death threats of like, you know, if you see this guy in public, beat him up, he's a neo-Nazi. And I message him saying, do you want to come on the show? Like, I don't care who you are, what you're about. My whole thing is kind of having an opinion. So yeah, I mean, my friends, for the most part, young people are just unbelievably woke. And there's also like young people now, it's like, I had a conversation with my friend and they were complaining about university debt or whatever. And I was like, but you're probably not even going to pay it off. And even if you do, it's like nothing. And there's just a disconnect, and the default is, you know, young people be left wing. So I'd say for the most part, the average person I meet who's my age are super woke, but my own personal friends aren't kind of on that bandwagon.
It's tragic that you've already been cancelled and lost friends for your views. And again, you do know people like Lawrence Fox, so you're obviously not going to fit in with the average 19-year-old. And, you know, and that thing about inviting them on the show, you can do that. It doesn't work. You know, Lawrence tried to invite Matthew Sweet on, who's a guy that likes to attack GB, has done a long thread about me trying to get me sued. Wow. And he likes to attack my workplace and try and destroy my living every day. But I would have him on, but he just would not. I said to Toby, should I get him on? He goes, no, he'll just quote tweet and say why he won't do it and be in a smug way. And that's exactly what he did with Lawrence. So they won't come on. But I try to get radical lefties on the current thing, proper like, you know, Marxist people. Hopefully they'll still come on. So I'd be interested. And the thing is, they'll get a softball interview because I'm too nice. It'll just be a softball interview because that's what I'm like. It won't be, but they still won't do it. But hey, let's see. So I wanted to ask you about what you thought about Tice's immigration policy, because he said on the podcast, I've got an announcement coming up about immigration. And what that turned out to be was at his rally, he said we need net zero immigration. So he said that the population is almost 70 million, around 10 million more than 15 years ago. And he says we need net zero immigration because there's a certain amount emigrate every year, which is 400k roughly. So bring 400k in, and then we can catch up. And to me, I'd say that's too many because we're not caught up. We need to just stop this whole thing for a bit. Then if we get back to some sort of normality, we could do a net zero. That's a decent idea. But what did you think to this net zero immigration idea?
Well, I'm against it for many reasons. We got, you know, NHS crisis. I think we've got 120,000 NHS vacancies, and we have job shortages. We got a record amount of young people not wanting to work. So we got this big thing going on now where it's like, I actually dig my generation a lot because a lot of the issues we have now is young people being so unbelievably lazy. They go to university and then they don't work. So like people in your age, for instance, at my age, were working a lot and like in way higher kind of stats than my generation. But now my generation are lazy. So I think I disagree with it completely because it's like we got all these issues going on. And you're going to say we need less immigration. But however, I'll give it to Richard Tice from Reform UK. The reason I don't mind them being anti-immigration to an extent is because they have economic populist policies to actually benefit people here. So like one issue I have with a lot of Tories when they talk about, oh, I'm anti-immigration, their policies don't actually help people here. But Richard Tice has made it clear he wants to help people here. He wants to push the threshold from 12.5k to 20k. He wants all frontline NHS staff to pay zero income tax for the next 3 years. He wants, Dr. David Ball recently said, with train and retain, he wants basically NHS, people who want to train to become doctors here, they're going to pay for their tuition fees or whatever that costs loads and is a big deterrent for a lot of people, and they're going to pay that for them, but that means they have to stay in the NHS for at least 5 years. So therefore, not only is it going to bring a lot of people in, it's also going to retain them, which is the massive issue we see with nurses and doctors, where they join the NHS and then they leave because of hours and everything. So while I disagree with Richard on this, I really respect Reform UK because they're actually a populist, and I think a big part of populism is it's left-wing economics, but the social aspect changes. So we have someone like Jeremy Corbyn, he's a left-wing populist, right? Because he's he's for nationalisation of everything. He's very left wing on, you know, what he wants. He wants to tax the rich and all of this. And then socially, he's extremely left wing. But you got Richard Tice, and I actually think Richard Tice and Jeremy Corbyn are actually quite similar, to be honest. And then and Richard Tice, who's a right winger, he wants he's a populist, so he's for, you know, helping working class people, 50% nationalisation of energy. He wants to, you know, push the tax threshold. He wants to help people like that. And then everything he's doing. Sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought.
You've got so many things, you've got so many threads going at once. I'm impressed how much you know, though. I mean, you're giving hope to the younger generation. I mean, most 19-year-olds, like you say, are kind of idiots. And no wonder you have to drink water after that. When I drink water, I get comments on the YouTube. Have you seen this? It's so annoying. People are like, can you stop the constant swigging? It's really annoying. Really? I'm just like, remove, block. Yeah, that's a block. I hate those people so much. Like, giving you all this free content, and the one thing you comment on is, I need to drink water.
Yeah.
I just need to drink water. I get a dry mouth, all right? And it's just like, can you stop that? I hate those people so much.
No,
They're just like so negative and pointless. That is a deletion and a block. That's a deleted comment block. Because it's not like, I disagree with Richard Tice on this, or I'm not going to vote reform, or he's talking crap is even fine by me, or even Nick's talking crap. But like, the water thing, you're gone. Anyway, but feel free to drink water, Roy. So you're talking about this. He has he at least cares about training up I call it the latent workforce of this country. He's saying if we get, I think he said somewhere, if you get 1 million people into work, it comes to roughly 15 billion a year
1.5,
that you'll make.
I think he said. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so his whole thing is make work better off than benefits. It's not rocket science. And I was going to pick you up on that. Actually, not pick you up, but just come back to something you said about Christians are hypocrites because they don't care about benefits and so on. So I'm not in that category. So I've been on benefits. So when I was your age, I was not as sorted out as you. I was not as articulate, or I was articulate, but I was a mess basically. You're incredibly impressive because all the things you're doing at your age. I was not. I was and you're welcome. I was a complete mess, and I was just like lost for most of my 20s as well, and I had terrible advice, and I went to a school that said you were nothing.
Wow.
And people, you were bullied, and you were, the teachers told you were nothing. The kids spat on you. It was brutal, man. And they said to me, not that it was like an inner city school or something. It was just a rubbish comprehensive in the country, but and I got the third highest grade in the country on history A level. I'm always talking about this. No one said like go to Oxford or anything. It wouldn't even be on the map, right? So there's no guidance. And then I kind of ended up on benefits, and it was just no guidance. And and people said, well, yeah, you better to get your benefits while you can if you're out of work. And it's actually bad advice because then you get trapped. It's a well-known thing, the benefits trap. And then to come off it, as I sort of hinted at with Richard, not to blow my own trumpet, but it's very hard for people who are, and this is maybe I could sound like a lefty, but if humans are wired for survival, right? It's very hard to tell someone, here's what you got to do today. You've got to come off benefits, make yourself poorer, make your life more uncertain, try and get this job that might not work out. It's harder. And it's more unstable because it could end any time, and you're actually going to have less money in your pocket. And it's just absurd to ask people to do that. And you can do that eventually. What you have to realize is spiritually, I'm going to be better off. So I actually am going to make myself poorer, and I am going to make my life harder in the short term. But how many people are in a position to do that? Or even have the resources and energy to do that? It takes an awful lot. So I'm not one of these people who's anti-benefit. And I said that to Richard, and he sort of agreed. He said it has to be a bit of carrot and stick, but he just said it's simply about making work pay. Do you have any thoughts on this, how to make work pay and help people get out of benefits?
I mean, that's really found out what you're saying about like you growing up and stuff, because there's a lot of people who they don't have someone, word of encouragement, as Jordan Peele would say, to like kind of go against what you're being told to do. Like, it's an incredibly difficult thing, and it's easy for people, I think, who don't go through that, like what you went through, to just point and say, well, do this, do that. But it's a completely different thing when you're actually in the situation. And I think that's another thing in life where it's easy to kind of say how to solve someone's issues without being that person and experiencing that. And I completely agree. Like, it takes so much for someone to obviously get off benefits if that benefits them overall. Like, it's against human nature. So what he's saying is, he's not saying that people who generally need benefits should get taken off benefits. And he made that clear, didn't he? He first of all started off by saying, we need it. We're a compassionate society. We need benefits for people who need it. And he made that super clear. But he's just making the point, we have 1.5 million extra people on benefits than before COVID who were fully working. And that's an issue. And people can dance around and say, oh, no, it's not. But that is an issue. And like, even in my own life, I spoke with a girl who at her work, there were people who didn't even want to take extra shifts because that meant that they, didn't qualify for certain benefit schemes, and that's just shows a shamble where people are denying work just because they're better off elsewhere. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's also another thing of just kind of, it's so sad, isn't it, how many young people aren't given a directional well done. And, you know, the fact that, like, you know, no one prompted you to go down other routes, you know, that's quite sad, because it's like, yeah, I mean, it's just sad. And I think that's a big part of, like, Christianity and community, of how it can be a open door to other things. And that's why I do understand, to respect, you know, people who are anti-immigration. They, you know, they want their little confined communities, and I do understand that to an extent. And yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to make myself like sound like Oliver Twist or something. I had two parents, nice enough home. You know, my dad grew up with no money. My mum had a little bit more, and we were just lower middle class, comprehensive school, very normal. But it was just not a good school, and it was the only person that said well done when I got the third highest grade in the country was the history teacher, who turned out later to be a pedo. That'll give you the idea. That's where I come from. So, and it's a world of difference, man. If you work at somewhere like GB or anywhere, and I get on my class high horse a little bit, and I sound like a dip, but it's a world of difference, because there's people who've been at comprehensive schools. It's not that we're like down the mines, and obviously there's loads of people struggling more than me. You know, you might not speak English or whatever it is, you might have disabilities. But we are in a different world from the posh people who've been at public school. I don't know, what was your school?
So I went to Catholic school. I hated school, hated nursery, hated primary, hated secondary. College was all right. But yeah, I went to Catholic school. It's public. It wasn't, you know, there's loads of working class people there. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, nitty gritty coal mine people, but it wasn't like, it was nowhere near like, you know, I don't know, posh people type thing. Yeah, it was kind of that. I mean, I hated everything. I hated the people, hated the education system, hated, everything about it pretty much. Happiest day of my life was the day I left school. And like,
are you not even going to university then?
Nah, no way.
Legend.
Because I've learned,
that's smart.
The greatest thing you got is YouTube. I've like in college, I got told go uni. Everyone was going uni. There's like a few people who didn't. It was like 2 people, I think. And like my teacher told me to go uni and stuff. I didn't want to go uni, because I just had the logic, you self-teach, and like everything I've learned pretty much has just been me watching YouTube tutorials, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and if you watch our shorts on the Current Thing YouTube channel, especially the one with Carl Benjamin, Rory did them, and you're clearly very talented at that, and you just learned all that yourself. And you're right, I mean, especially the school closures and the sort of university closures revealed that you don't need them, because they were just doing online anyway, right?
100%. I mean,
it's cool that you've done that, man, because that's what I would advocate for anyone young. But the fact you've actually done it, obviously, if you're going to be a doctor or something, you can't really do that. You're like just looking at how to do the surgery online, like, so maybe not a good idea. But for your kind of thing,
I appreciate that.
What do you want to actually do then? You just want to do like YouTube stuff and podcast yourself and things like that?
So my goal is to do my podcast full time. Yeah, that's my overall goal. I want to do it full time. I want to creep onto GB News eventually, do a few segments there. You know, hopefully build up my profile a little bit. But my goal is to create a movement. And one of my big goals actually is almost de-radicalization for my podcast, because I feel like with right wingers, I feel like people do feel they need to overcompensate and actually agree with people even if they don't. So it's like, oh, you know, you're skeptical of certain medical products. That also means you need to throw the whole thing out the bag and be skeptical of every single medical product ever. Or, you know, I can't even think of anything. I don't know, like just a right-wing issue. People feel that they need to throw everything out. They need to agree and they need to fit in a box with their opinions. And there's not many people out there, I think, who just say, you don't need to fit in a box with your opinions. And I really embrace that kind of, I don't fit in a box, you know.
I appreciate your euphemistic phrasing of certain medical products so that we could possibly put this on YouTube. And but you need to cut down your swearing, Rory, because YouTube don't like that. And also GB News, no swearing, man. Really? The one thing, you'll get there, the one thing, I've been trained out of it. I said like bollocks today, but that's as far as I'll go. Like, I've been trained out of it because GB's headline is no swearing, and if anyone drops an F-bomb, you've got to apologise. And even words like piss or like balls, it's like very, very strict. So, you know, once you get there, you can come on GB. But I'm saying that I have no power. I would get you on today if I could. What did you think to his points on the civil service? I don't know if it's something like a 19-year-old thinks about that much, but it's interesting because I was out with the civil service. Like, how do I put this? Well, let's just talk about Tice first. He says that I said to him, how would you get the civil service blob in line? Because you've got people like Suella Braverman say, let's do this. Then she can't even do it because her department ignores her. We've just seen Dominic Raab get basically ousted by the civil service. You know, he may have been a bully, I don't know, but it seemed like he basically got ousted by his own department. And then Tice pointed out he ran a company just outside the largest 300 in the world or whatever. Oh, Britain, not sure which, but pretty big company. He said he just warned them, and then if they didn't do it, he would sack them if it was a company. So he said, just run it like a company. But is that naive? I mean, you've got this bloated civil service, and they hate the government. And I was out with some of the extended blob last night, I call them, which is like Bank of England people, which isn't the civil service, but Bank of England, BBC, think tank people, and they all hate the Tory government, obviously massively. I mean, I don't like this government either, and I've actually never voted Tory, but they actually despise the government. So what were you convinced by his argument of how he would sort the civil service?
Yeah, I think he's got some valid points there about how, like, the structure and how it's run, and it's completely broken. And I think, you know, I've heard a thing where it's like we should nationalise a lot of things but run them like private institutions, and it does have its place. Like, if you are guaranteed a certain amount of money for a certain task, then there is a passivity, is that, what's the word?
Passivity.
Yeah, passivity to it. And I think, yeah, he's got some very valid points like that. But I think with Dominic Raab and stuff, you do need to call out things when they are an issue, and it's easy to sweep everything under the rug. But when there are real issues, you do need to call it out. And for what I saw with that, there did seem to be a lot of complaints and stuff. And it's easy to kind of call it snowflake culture, but if you do create a culture where nothing can be called out, then things do go under the rug properly, and then you got Harvey Weinstein and stuff. And I'm not saying that, you know, it's going to lead to that in the UK, but you know, it's one thing to call things snowflake culture, but it's another thing to call out sexual harassment, to call out abuse, to call out, you know, multiple wrongdoings. Like, it's very important to not just say, you know, oh, it's snowflake culture, because that when you say that, you're also closing the door on a lot of horrendous things that just don't get spoken about, you know.
Yeah, although Raab, to be fair to him, was only done on two minor issues in the end. One was that he changed personnel on some deal with Gibraltar. The other was that he criticised civil servants in a way that they felt insulted, and that was thought to be bullying. Pretty minor. We don't really know unless we're there if he really was a bully. I suspect it was pretty minor, and he was just trying to get results. I've heard that he tried to even adapt his language once he realised it was offending people. Not everyone has a lot of empathy. So funny you mentioned Me Too again. Have you ever seen Limitless, that movie?
No, I haven't.
Such a great movie. It's like not a good movie. You know movies that aren't like good necessarily, but you want to watch them again because they're kind of like cool, and you want to imagine like being limitless and taking the guy takes a drug that makes him ultra smart, and then you can just take over everything.
Yeah, I might have seen that. I think I might have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's a series. I was like, I'll try and watch the series, and I knew it wasn't going to be very good. At the very start, he gets the drug to be super smart. You know what he does with it? He's in an office and he categorizes all their employees into the likelihood of being a risk of a Me Too. I'm like, that's what you did with your super smart ability. Wow. I was like, this is so pathetic. I actually turned off. I was like,
really?
I can't watch it. I just can't watch it. I was like, he files them into 5 different categories of their risk to the employer of creating a Me Too incident. I was like, that's so pathetic. Yeah. That's in a series. I was like, that's like the woke version. What would I do with unlimited powers? I'd sort the HR department.
Bloody human resources. But then,
anyway,
but I also think like that's also another thing. And you know, when young people my age, for instance, there is a big sexual assault culture, and this is one of the things I'm talking about of overcompensating. So it's like Me Too is Me Too and that whole movement, and you know what going on with their false accusations, horrendous, like disgusting, you know, false accusations and all that. I think, you know, that is one of the worst things, because you're degrading both situations. But I also think we've lost a bit of gentleman culture where, you know, with the rise of anti-10 stuff now, to almost call out sexual assault, you're now a simp and stuff, and you're a snowflake, and I think we're losing kind of traditional values in the good sense of, like, you know, people do stand up for each other and things of that nature. And you know, even when I was in the club the other night and I saw, you know, just men just, you know, without consent and stuff, and also like just I don't know. Oh, sorry, just again.
Told you, man, you'll never get on TV.
Yeah,
carry on.
That's bad. Just like kind of grabbing girls and stuff, and I thought it was grim. And you know, it's important to call things out. And I think old school gentleman culture is very good. and it's something that our society, I think, lacks of that. And instead, it's either, you know, you're an Andrew Tate lover boy who calls everyone a simp and a woke soy boy, or you're a soy boy who calls everyone a rapist. Sorry, I just swore again.
Yeah, I'm telling you, so something to work on in the future. I'm helping young men clean up their act. You know, it's funny when you say, I like the gentleman culture, getting a plug for your podcast, but yeah, I find myself in these weird positions defending these people where I would never do anything like that, and then I'm defending them. So it is kind of weird, but, you know, so you've got a point. I just got into a digression there about the Limitless series, because I thought if on these episodes we can have a bit of a digression, right? If we can't have a bit of fun here, where can we? But I did want to say, what did you think about his idea about whether Britain's finished? Because I've got this thing on the podcast, I like to ask if Britain's finished, because I'm obsessed with it. And obviously, I'd like to get your opinion as a young person. I mean, this episode has been half an interview of you, because I don't speak to many 19-year-olds. But is Britain finished? I asked him, and he said that we were heading for this waterfall, and he's done a brilliant short clip about it on our YouTube. We're heading for the rocks, and we've got about 10 years max, and after that we're going to crash on the rocks, and then it's over. And I tried to ask him, and he didn't totally answer it, what that looks like. I said, is it like socialism? Is it anarchy in the streets? And he never answered that, which was a pity. But what did you think to his idea that we're heading for these rocks, and what do you think the rocks are?
That's a great question. I think he gave a fascinating answer to that. I think with that question, it almost doesn't matter, because even if we were heading towards, you know, a full-blown breakdown of society, that shouldn't really deter people's intentions, because let's say we are going towards a full-on communist regime, which I don't think's true, but, you know, some sort of authoritarian, theocracy, whatever you want to call it, then people should do everything in their power for that not to happen. And if people do lose trust, and we are seeing people lose trust in health agencies and regulatory bodies, it's a scary thing, and that does look like an authoritarian regime, and I don't think we're far away from that at all. You know, people were okay to get locked in their houses for 2 years. People were okay with that happening, and there is this two different worlds forming, where it's like, you know, I speak to you, and even though I disagree with you on a lot, we come from the same place. We believe in freedom, we believe in body autonomy, you know, putting certain products in our bodies, you have the right for that, and you'll defend a left-winger's freedom of speech, and he won't defend yours. You know, that's where we're coming from, even though we disagree on a lot. But there's also people who are NPCs, who wear 9 masks, who take certain products, who watch BBC News every day, who think we should send, you know, 100 billion to Ukraine. And they're these two different worlds forming, and that is just becoming more and more prominent. And I guess what that looks like is people, what I think we're heading towards is people who think they're the complete opposite. And it's nothing revolutionary what I'm saying here, but like people who think they are the, you know, anti-fascists, who are actually the new form of fascists. Like, we're in an unbelievably circumstance where you have people like Andrew Bridgen, a right winger, a Brexiteer, calling on a investigation into, you know, some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and wanting to investigate certain health agencies being captured by big multinational corporations. And he gets told by left wingers he's anti something for doing so. So like the whole dynamic is broken, and like, you know, we got caught. You know, the Tories want to increase corporation tax, so we're living in just bonkers time, and I think we're just heading towards a compliance culture that will eventually result in a government being formed that is tyrannical to the most, you know, the biggest definition of that. And I guess overall, I think it's irrelevant if it's going to happen or not, because you have to do something, and if you don't do something, then you can't complain about it, really. Yeah.
Very interesting. And Andrew Bridgen, by the way, is our first ever episode on this podcast, and we haven't put it on YouTube because just so many things about the medical products. But we might be able to put some clips up before he gets around to it. And I don't know what to do with it, man. But it's such a good episode. But he's been treated very badly, as you say. And what about though, as a young person, you listen to Richard, you talk about we're going to crash on the rocks. Do you have hope for Britain or England in general, or is there like because I have very little hope, and I used to have more hope as a young person, but that's because the culture war wasn't so prominent and hadn't taken over, and we just weren't thinking about it. In the 90s, things were basically going well. But do you, growing up in this time of divided culture wars and so on, must be very weird. Do you have despair about the future of the country, or are you just a young, optimistic person because you're young and things seem possible?
No, I'm extremely pessimistic. I've seen people on Snapchat and stuff who are my own age, selling their bodies for money. That's normal. So like online prostitution and for my age is normal. Not tolerating people who have a different opinion is normal. Calling people fascist and racist 24/7, hating your country constantly, calling everyone racist. Not being skeptical of big multinational corporations, even though you say you're left wing, not believing in body autonomy, not believing in human rights, all of this stuff that I've experienced myself, I have absolute pessimism for the future. I got very little hope. I guess the hope I have is that eventually the tides will turn, and in some respects, the UK will go back to some form of traditionalism, and I think we can learn a lot from older people, and that's one thing I've done myself. Like when I grew up, I thought my gran was a bit of a, she fought some out there views, but now I listen to her and I agree with her on, 92%.
Gran was right.
Yeah, and I actually interviewed her for my podcast, and it was a crazy episode because we had this woman, 86. She was with my granddad for 84 years plus, and the wisdom that she espoused of simply things like she spoke to her granddad for. Her husband for 5 years before they did anything, and the culture, the community and everything. And I think as a society we can learn so much from older people. And yeah, overall I got a terrible pessimistic view of the future, to say the least.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's sad to hear. I mean, that is sad to hear, but it sounds like it's the result of you growing up amongst people who have suffered from whatever you want to call it, the woke indoctrination, whatever phrase you want to use. They've bought into it all. They hate the country. They're intolerant of free speech. And you're the result of that generation. It must be horrendous to be having to grow up amongst these idiots, brainwashed NPCs, as you say. But like you say, it could turn back. I mean, I'm starting to think more and more. I haven't fleshed this out yet, but I tended to think, okay, things are just getting worse and worse and worse, and entropy and degeneracy. But then I look at it and go, there's only so far you can go. And you can look at the example of Weimar, and then it went back a bit aggressively towards Hitler. But you can look at history, and there's only so far humans can really go towards degeneracy. You look at Sam Smith and stuff, you go like, okay, yeah, these are all the same old trope. We're trying to be as degenerate as possible. But actually, I've started to think we will come back just because there's nowhere else to go. Steve Bannon believes in this fourth turning, and people find it a bit kooky. It's this idea that there's these four different stages in history, and they just keep repeating. And he sort of believes in that a bit too much to a sort of weird degree, where apparently Trump was questioning whether to bomb Syria or something, and anyway, and Bannon was talking to Jared Kushner about it. I'm not remembering the story perfectly, but one thing was said was like, well, should we really do this? And Bannon sort of said, well, there's going to be loads of this kind of thing. Things have got to get darker before they get better. So he had a kind of accelerationist attitude, which at that level of the White House, people found was a bit like worrying. Wow. This was listened to a podcast with his biographer. It's like, hang on, Bannon so believes in this fourth turning that he's like, yeah, we'll let things get a bit worse because then the good parts come around. But it might come round though, Rory. I basically agree with you. I wrote an article called "England is Lost Forever," but now I'm starting to think maybe it'll come round because there's nowhere else for it to go. But maybe I'm just being a deluded optimist, which is very unlike me. But confronted with your even more pessimist attitude, I've suddenly gone optimist just for balance. Yeah. Do you want to comment on either? There's three areas that I haven't talked about yet: the net zero stuff, the Christian morality stuff, and proportional representation. Do any of those interest you? Maybe the Christian one is most interesting because you're a Christian. And I try and build a team of hardcore Christians. We've got Andrew, our designer, who's a Christian. We've got Rory, who's Christian. Ben's helped me with some things. He's a Mormon, which is like a Christian on steroids. And you've got to be a Christian to work on this podcast. Except our brilliant producer, Jason, I don't think is. But I asked him at the end, and he said he wears his Christianity fairly lightly. He's a nominal sort of Christian. It sounded like to me. Or at least he felt it was a private thing. And he said, in the UK, we don't really do Christianity, religion in politics. And he said, your faith or lack of faith should have no bearing on how the country is run, which I found a bit questionable. But he said, but heritage should, he was talking sort of generally in terms of heritage, our general morality. But to me, that he's actually just talking about our Christian heritage, but he just doesn't want to quite frame it that way because he's reluctant to lose voters or just think, he thinks, not in a cynical way, he just thinks that's the wrong way to do it. He thinks the country should be run just competently and your Christianity's on the side, and yet all the morality he was citing as essential is Christian morality. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good question because that's a big kind of dividing line of where someone's moral compass is at, and it's a big deal. Like if you ask someone what's right and wrong, and they say, well, this is right, this is wrong, then that's based on something. Or like, if you ask someone what's right, it's like, well, if it's good and makes you happy, and then it's like, okay, so you don't have a right or wrong, so there is no moral compass. And you do see that Christianity and religion has a massive implication of how people structure things and how people base and what's good and bad. And I think I found it really weird he actually said that, because he's so hawkish on immigration. He's like, stop the boats, and that means so many people who would support him, like me, then don't support him, even though they do like him and a lot of what he stands for. But then when it comes to Christianity, he's skeptical to do that, which I found quite bizarre, actually. And I think I think it does have a massive play in what and how you govern and what policies you actually use, because, and also there's also hypocrisy within that as well, because as a Christian, I'm pro-immigration. As a Christian, I'm very pro-asylum seekers, and that's not a traditional kind of Christian right-wing outlook, but it's also an angle that doesn't get talked about a lot, which is like a left-wing, or no, centre-left or right-wing Christian that isn't hawkish on immigration like that. So I think that it was a bad response, to be honest, because he should have owned the fact of what he was saying. He kind of he spoke two sides of his mouth almost. He used his own personal view on Christianity and then deflected that from how you govern. And I think anyone could say objectively that being a Christian does affect how you govern if you have power. And I guess maybe that's because there's been an influx of, I don't know, Muslim voters to Reform UK or Sikhs, and that's fine. And you could use maybe more religious term of religion, not specific Christianity. But I think it definitely does have a massive effect. And as a society, we are drifting massively away from Christianity. And what does that mean for the future, especially those who get in power? I don't know.
Yeah. I suppose he was saying you can't implement it at the policy level, because Christianity has been our culture, but it hasn't been necessarily we run things with policies according to Christianity. I guess that's what he meant. But yeah, maybe my question could have been clearer. But yeah, he was a bit evasive on it. Evasive is too strong, but he wasn't sort of strongly coming out as a Christian or anything. So would you have a kind of theocracy, Rory, a libertarian theocracy? It's a bit of a challenge, but
No, not at all. I'm for complete religious freedom. I don't care, what religion you are, what you're about. I've got absolutely no problem with that. I do think, your laws should be made somewhat on it. So as a Christian, I think that if people are in need, we should help them. I think we should help the homeless. We should help, those struggling. We should promote, traditional values, family first policies. we that's what we should promote. I think that's what we should do as a Christian. And that's how my society looks. That doesn't mean that people can't do things that I classify as, not very good, may that be degeneracy and stuff. People have the complete freedom to do that, because, as Jordan Peterson famously said, if people don't have the right to do things, then what actually is right or wrong? If everyone's made to do something right, is that right, or is that just normal? What then becomes right if everyone's doing the same thing?
Without free will, you mean? What becomes right?
Yeah, because if normal, how can right be right if it's normal? If in a sense.
That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. I don't know which video you mean. I used to watch loads of Peterson, then I stopped. Was he a big deal for you and your generation?
Yeah. I would say,
not the other spokesman of your generation. Sorry about this. Because I don't speak to many 19-year-olds. It'd be kind of weird if I did, but I'm just kind of really interested.
No, great question. For me, he's been a massive impact on me. I read 12 Rules for Life recently. I listened to him loads. It's actually just there for anyone who's watching. Personal responsibility, taking responsibility for your actions, thinking of duties and things you have to do is not a negative but actually a positive. And instead of a lot of young people, they grow up, they think, I want to be freedom, I don't want responsibility, I want to drink, go out, party 24/7, shag people and all that 24/7. For me, listening to Jordan Peterson shifted my whole perspective, because I've realised that the most freedom you can get is through responsibility, and people who seek freedom actually find the least happiness often. And I've seen that with people I know who they just go out and there's just no future. It's just now gratification, and then I actually see how miserable they are. And it's definitely shaped me a lot. And I disagree with Jordan Peterson on so much. I say politically, he chats nonsense, but philosophically, I love him.
That's him told. I'd love to see you tell hey, Peterson, you're chatting nonsense, mate. Politically, he is quite bad. He's a bit of a boomer politically. He's a bit of a... He wrote for the UN. He's getting a bit more conservative actually on Twitter, but he used to just post quite centrist things. his expertise is more in the archetypes and the Jungian archetypes and the all the kind of the biblical extrapolations and the psychological questions. He's sort of brilliant on all that. But then straight politics is maybe his weakest area. I kind of agree with you. Although here we are just dissing Peterson, like kind of ridiculous in a way, isn't it? The hubris of that. But all right, there's only two other things that we haven't covered except for maybe Farage, but we were only mentioned him very briefly in the podcast. The only two things I haven't mentioned are net zero and proportional representation. Do you have any strong views on either of those or on anything Tice said about them?
I think I disagree with him on net zero. I think he's downplaying the climate crisis. Climate change is a real issue, and to act like just because you quote one thing about CO2, I don't think dismantles thousands of scientists. And I'm not saying that we're all going to die tomorrow, but to dismiss it down to kind of something as bland as that, I thought was a bit come on.
Well, do you agree with he said the green lobby is basically it's about follow the money? Because I asked him where does the climate cult come from? Or whatever you call it. And he said, maybe that's a loaded question. He said it's a green lobby and there's loads of jobs in it, but it sounds like you're a true believer.
Well, I'm not a true believer, but I'm completely on the fence currently. I'm doing my research. I think that, to me, it seems a little ridiculous. I understand what he means about subsidies, and there's a fair criticism there of, how much influence, but it's kind of flipping it on its head because we have, BP, Shell invest in and lobby politicians and these jobs and these contracts, and then instead of kind of saying that, instead you're flipping it completely on its head and saying, no, the issue is the green lobby. And it's like, all right, if you talk about both, fair enough, but if you're just going to talk about the green lobby, that just seems completely kind of nonsensical almost. And for me, I actually prefer Richard Tice so much more than Farage, because Richard Tice is a legit populist, and that's one thing I've really grown to like about Reform now, is they're pushing populist policies. And what Farage would do is he would just talk about immigration, and in actual policies it wouldn't actually be kind of left-wing economics type thing. But Richard Tice, he's pushing kind of right-wing socially and left-wing economics. And for me, I actually love to see some real populism, because I think Nigel Farage is just a complete fake populist, really.
Really?
Yeah.
Hang on. So you like Tice because he's more of a populist than Farage, but how do you define populism then?
So, I define it as someone who has kind of policies that benefit the working class, and that's their intentions to benefit those kind of lowest in society, but then depending off their right or left wing, that kind of dictates how they are socially. So like a right-wing populist is very nationalistic, but then a left-wing populist is kind of a bit scared to be nationalistic, but his actual policies are very working class. So just like someone like Jeremy Corbyn, he's a real populist. And then I would say Richard Tice is a real populist, but Nigel Farage, I think, is a complete fake populist. Yeah.
Well, he's more of a Thatcherite, isn't he, Farage, who sort of ended up here. But and do you have anything on proportional representation? Because like, I don't know. Again, I was going to say your generation, but would you be up for change of the whole electoral system? Yeah,
I would say. I mean, it's got pros and cons. Obviously, you've got extremist parties can come in it without a different system, but I think that we need direct democracy. I support what they have in Switzerland, where cantonal governance, where you have local boroughs or local places where they dictate their own tax law, where everything's kind of decentralized and people actually dictate what they happen. So me in Portsmouth, I think it's ridiculous. Someone in not Scotland, let's say Liverpool, an MP from Liverpool is having dictate of how much tax I should pay in Portsmouth. That just seems nonsense to me. I think we need what they have in Switzerland, cantonal governance, where people who live in places actually decide their own laws and their own taxes, and I think everything would be a lot better if it was that way. But I've got a quick question for you. What's one major takeaway from interviewing Richard Tice, and what has changed since interviewing him?
Interesting. Well, my initial takeaway was just that he was a good guy and easy to get along with, which kind of sounds silly, but I wasn't sure he was going to be like that. And my other take, you sprung a question on me here, Roy. Let me think about it. What's changed since? You mean since I did the interview a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, like what has changed your perspective of Reform UK, or specifically Richard Tice, or?
This is a good question. I wasn't expecting it to be turned on me. Maybe we should interview me for these. This is a total experiment. Well, I was impressed by him overall. I just thought he was an ultra competent person. He seemed to have a history of being competent at running businesses, or running that large business he spoke about. Of course, I'm only going off what he says, but I'm also going off the general vibe and just my experience of working with him. He was an upbeat, high-energy person, easy to work with. Though he seemed nice, when he spoke about he would just fire people, that would be a hard line. I did think, would I want to work for Richard? Because I was thinking, we're getting on now, but he'd probably can my ass. He'd be like, you're fired, bro. He did seem kind of aggressive with that. But I actually think that's absolutely what we need. So I was thinking, it sounds like it'd be tough to work for Richard, perhaps, if it's as he says it is. But then again, that's exactly what we need for the country. And it was interesting he thought we had 10 years, which I think is generous, but the fact that even he thinks we are going to crash. My overall takeaway is I basically agree with most things he says, or at least, don't significantly disagree. Like Christianity we can talk about, or some of the minutiae of the policies. But my overall take is, here's one of the few people who are actually going to do anything and actually want to shake up the system. And I'm as disillusioned with the Tories as anyone. In fact, disillusioned is even the wrong word, because I've never voted for them. So to me, he's one of the few options, and Reform are one of the few options. And we also had Belinda on the podcast, and she's cool as well. And then they've got Farage. They're one of the few options you could actually vote for. And maybe he even did win my vote during it. I might even go that far.
Wow.
But I'm also pretty hopeless because no one, they're still not going to be able to make a dent without proportional representation. And I'm not totally convinced that it will come in. He was convinced it would come in with Labour. I'm not. But he may well know more than me. But I'm just not convinced it will. Maybe because I've lived with the other system my whole life. And I don't know if Labour will be incentivized to do it if they win by a lot. But I still have a bit of despair, because I'm like, I could vote for them. In my area, it won't make any difference in our current system anyway, which is obviously why we need PR. But it won't make any difference. And then I hung out last night with the Blob, and I'm kind of joking, but they're kind of like BBC, Bank of England. One of them, it wasn't actually there, it was in a think tank, but these are all these people I know in North London. I've been tweeting about it and getting some people attack me. But you realise their perspective is totally different, and they'll be closer to you, but they're still way more sort of left than you, and they think Starmer's the answer. They think he's going to rejoin the EU and it'll all be great. One person wasn't as naive as that, or zealous as that, if you want to say. Not naive, perhaps it's unfair, because this guy someone's an economic expert, but they think they have this faith in Starmer. They're sort of like Blairites still, basically. Two of them called Jacob Rees-Mogg the C word. Two of them said he belongs in prison. Wow. I'm like, these are my neighbours. Some of them are my family, but I'm just like, this is insane. So, although I can get encouraged listening to Tice and going, I basically agree with most things, and I'd definitely consider them as someone to vote for. Then I speak to the people in my area and I realise they're just not going to get anywhere, and we are just going to keep going ever more leftwards, because shockingly, the Blob people, the Remainer people, and that's an unfair characterisation, but whatever, they look at the situation and go, you know what we need? More leftism, more Labour. We need Starmer. And I'm just like going, that's mad. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, you could argue that left-wingers would say this not left-wing, Starmer isn't left-wing, and that's why he's tried to cancel out people like Corbyn and lefties like Corbyn. I mean, like, Corbyn's right. Like, his policies are super popular. I'd say, for me, Starmer is a man of no principle. He's authoritarian. He's wanted harsh lockdowns. He called Freedom Day reckless. He's like, he throws friends under the bus. He threw Jeremy Corbyn under the bus. Like, I think he's just a scummy man, to be honest. And yeah, sure, he might have some alright policies, but he's just kind of a boring man with no real change and so far no principles. So I agree with you for the most part, but I'd say a lot of lefties would say we don't have actual left-wingers.
Of course, he's a neo-lib. What I mean is, I sometimes call them the new normies. This is what I coined in my article, Confessions of a Conservative Rebel. You should read it on the Daily Skeptic. I'm trying to figure out what this new type of person is. They work for the deep state, the blob, the extended blob, and they kind of like, they have all these, their opinions are sort of post-Blair, and they would have been very centrist in the past. They're centrist economically or centre-left economically, but then they kind of have these wildly left, they basically bought into wokeness. So if you criticise BLM, they'll freak out, or Antifa or something like that. And they're kind of weird. So it's neoliberalism with a kind of patina of wokeness on it. I find it very strange. I'm always trying to figure out what it's all about. I suppose Matt Goodwin might talk about it as the new elite or something, but which is one of the ideas that one of the people vehemently sort of shouted down last night was the idea that they were in this elite. But then it was quite funny. I was asking them about how I could ever get a mortgage or what I should do. And they were like, couldn't even relate. Like, they have no advice because they all just have mortgages. So I'm just like, I'm on the outside. I've ended up in a different by being a mess in my 20s. I've ended up in a different social group to them. So funny. But so I accept your point. Starmer's not like a leftist or anything. Well, actually, although just a quick caveat, he was the editor of Socialist Alternatives,
really,
which is he's actually a Pabloist. Check this out, which is a subset of Trotskyism. So it is a socialist subset, and the critique of him would be that he's secretly more leftist than he lets on, as Blair was or any of these people.
I've heard that a lot, actually, of how like he's playing, centrist or whatever to get in, and once he's in, he's going to be very left-wing like Corbyn. People have heard that. I don't know how true that is. I'd say like what you just said about kind of what actually is this new phenomenon. I would just say I call it now a cult because it's like there's no actual philosophy. It's like I'm a traditional left winger, pro freedom of speech. I mean, that doesn't exist anymore. So the one of the core tenets of leftism completely thrown away. I'm anti-war. War's terrible. We shouldn't have war. And then you look at Ukraine. Let's send billions to Ukraine. Wave your Ukrainian flag. Or I'm skeptical of big multinational corporations. And then they're screaming, go Pfizer, Moderna, yay. We shouldn't investigate these big multinational corporations. Or, I'm pro human rights. Human rights are so important. We should have human rights for immigrants and everything. And then, let's shut you down for the past 2 years. If you say anything, you're a far-right racist. There's no political philosophy because anyone objectively would look at the past 2 years and say, to a legitimate left-winger that, that's wrong. And we do have actual left-wingers like Russell Brand. And what happens if you're actually left-wing now? You're classified as right-wing. So, it's just a cult. It's either, you wear your 8 mask, you wear your Ukrainian flag or whatever, and that's now the cult. And then if you're someone who's legitimately left-wing, who's like Russell Brand, who hates capitalism, who hates big multinational corporations, you're now classified as right-wing. So it's just the cult v not the cult, I think.
You could say these people just support the current thing.
Yeah,
Get a plug. And this is why I call it this name.
Yeah.
It was meant to be a joke name because that is what they're like. And it's a satirical name. And I said it last night in one of my tweets that I wrote after being out with these people. I wrote, the Remainer blob, which you're calling the cult, seemed to frame everything in terms of competence. And no doubt this government has been incompetent, but it's a kind of gaslighting that pretends there are no deeper political issues at stake, much as atheists, often the same people, pretend God has been debunked. So I sort of see these people as they think it's all about competence, all about managing the economy, and obviously we want to do that well. But then they sort of pretend that everything's been settled and we live in this materialist, technocratic, materialist world. It's all been settled. You're mad if you think anything else. And they just go along with whatever the current thing is. And everything else is like, you believe in God, you're stupid. If you criticize the way they're running. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, no, it's a great name. It summarizes the culture so well, what's happening. And the amount of people, I had a left winger I spoke to the other day and I was like, so do you think big multinational corporations having interests in our regulatory bodies, do you think that's an issue? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, wait, you're left wing, right? And then I said, this company called Pfizer that has a certain medical product who had the biggest lawsuit in history for fraud and data, and we've had whistleblowers come out, people lose their whole careers over speaking about this. Do you think maybe we should investigate that as you're skeptical of capitalism? And it's just the disconnect. It's like they are in the cult. It's like they don't put 2 and 2 together, and it's just mind-boggling. Even another example, people who say they're left-wing have not spoke about one of the biggest layoffs of the past 10 years. 40,000 care home workers got sacked. Working class people in terrible conditions got sacked. And then also you got 127,000 NHS workers who were going to lose their jobs. The only trade union that stood up for them were Workers for England. So again, it's a cult. They don't stand up for workers' rights. They're not skeptical of capitalism. They're not pro freedom of speech. They're not pro human rights. It's just madness. And it's crazy when you come into contact with these people and they convince themselves they actually think they're left-wing. And the truth is an old school left-winger, unionist, politically incorrect, nationalistic. I love the old school left. I think that's great. But it's so difficult to find that anymore, really.
Yeah. Interesting. And perhaps they'd call themselves centrists. Maybe they wouldn't even call themselves left. But I don't really believe there's such a thing as centrism. I think it's sort of an aggregate of you just think progressivism's going a bit far. So someone says drag queen story time, someone says no, that's evil, and you go, well, we'll have drag queen story time once a week or so. It's like a weird kind of, to me it's just like that you just pick a position in between two. Progressivism comes up with something obscene and you come up with something a bit more moderate that they were probably doing 5 years ago. And to me it's not a coherent philosophy, and Dominic Cummings doesn't think it's real either, because as I said on that episode with Lawrence Fox, I said that actually the average person believes in the NHS and the death penalty for certain crimes. So that would be an accurate party would run on that. Like, we're going to save the NHS, then kill a load of people.
That's a great point. That, like, it's just like people's political ideologies are broken, so broken. Because again, and the fact that people who speak out against big multinational corporations are called far right. That's all you need to know about the political dynamic. Like. I think.
Although you said you didn't want to be put in a box either, so maybe you're a sort of centrist.
Well, I'll classify myself as a small L right-wing libertarian. That's
wow. No wonder you've got all your friends have abandoned you, Roy. That's such a hard thing to explain to someone down the pub. Yeah. I'm a small L classical. What do you say? Classical libertarian.
So I'm a small L right-wing libertarian.
What's the small L mean?
So, like, I'm not for, like, laissez-faire capitalism, deregulation, but I'm also got big L traits. I'm, like, I'm open borders, but I'm also not welfare state, which is, like, more left. You know, I'm
open borders is a big L.
Yeah.
It's a big F. All right, sorry, just attacked you there at the very end for being open borders. Oh, that was good, though. We covered loads of ground. Don't know what this episode was, because I just basically end up interviewing you, because I'm always just fascinated with people. So, well, maybe we could do specific topics in the future. I'm thinking already, maybe we should do an Andrew Tate one.
Oh, that'd be great.
Where you call me a hypocrite for an hour. We could do that. We do specific topics. But everyone subscribe to the podcast, obviously, if you're listening. Give it a 5-star rating. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And there's an episode coming up you're going to love, Rory, which is with Jamie Franklin, who's a bass vicar. So everyone should listen out for that one. And go to Rory's channel, The Radical English Gentleman. Which is on... Sorry,
could I say go to Spotify, because I try and... sorry to interrupt. It's because I never promote a YouTube channel because I get things censored a lot and stuff.
Oh really? Yeah. So don't even go. Your position is don't even go.
Just go to Spotify or Apple, and you can hear me ranting in my garage there. Yeah.
This could be where you're going wrong, Rory. Don't go to my channel. Go and hear me on I was going to say an obscure platform. Spotify is a big platform. Okay, so you get away with more on Spotify. All right, so go to The Radical English Gentleman on Spotify. And current thing, we've got, like I say, that great episode coming up, and we've got the one with Tanya Ed was just out, which was very good. Got another few in the can, and got some great guests coming up. Not even going to tell you, but a lot of them are called Andrew, and they're all very good.
No way.
So not Tate, sadly, not Tate, but I've got a couple of other Andrews coming up. But all right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you with a normal guest episode next week, I imagine, or this might come out midweek. So we'll see you soon. Anyway, all right. Cheers, Rory.